Hello there, Riderflex Nation. Steve Urban here with more career advice and job interviewing tips for you. And as a quick reminder, if you enjoy our podcast, please remember to subscribe to our channel and like the episodes. And on today's podcast, we have Mike Hopkins, the CEO of Bakken Midstream, which is an oil and energy company based in North Dakota. Mike, thanks so much for being on the call today.
It's my pleasure, Steve. I've been looking forward to this.
Tell us a little about yourself. Give the listeners some background, personally, hobbies, where you're from, things like that.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start with where I'm from. I was born in Canada. I am Canadian, although I became a dual citizen. I'd say I had a great upbringing and a pretty special one. I grew up as part of a military family. My father was a chaplain in the Canadian Army, became actually the chaplain general. But one attribute of that, as you might imagine, as a typical Army brat, along with my sister, we were constantly traveling as we were growing up every 3 or 4 years. So that, to me, was a great way to grow up with lots of experiences, travel at an early age. I tell you, Steve, that both parents were very influential in terms of who I am today. My father was an extraordinary. Both actually, my mother and father, both came from the same little rural area in Ontario, Canada, a place called Perth. I'd say relatively poor farming community, and both of them grew up very modestly, but my father ended up, becoming the chaplain general of the Canadian Armed Forces, and taught me about the value of hard work and the importance of hard work. Also, probably to this day stands out as the most ethical person, rigorously ethical person I've ever met in my whole life to this day. Certainly was someone that told me and taught me at the earliest age, and it stuck with me, that you always have to do the right thing, no matter what the consequence is to you personally. My mother, very different person. She was a career diplomat. And I think what I learned from her was she just had this natural, inherent curiosity about everything. Wherever she was, whoever she was with, that was the most interesting thing or the most interesting person in the world. And she just took that in. And that philosophy, I think, is sort of part of my personality and has served me well.
Oh, no doubt. I can just knowing you as little as I do, you can see it right away. The work ethic, the people skills, the ability to adapt in any type of situation or with any culture, all came from the parents and the moving around and so forth. As many people as I've interviewed, every time I talk to somebody that came from a military upbringing where they moved around a lot, their people skills are excellent because they learned quickly how to adapt to, in new worlds, new cultures, new societies, new schools, etc. You just learn how to make friends really fast. That's great. Fantastic.
You sure do. I think there are a few of the people I saw along the way growing up in the military that they just didn't like it. They really couldn't deal with that. But yeah, my observation would be the same as yours. Most people that grew up in the military, I think, developed these very natural people skills, I think, of necessity. You just knew you were going to be making friends of necessity, brand new friends every few years.
Right. And
that just became kind of the kind of person you are.
And then you went to school in Alberta, I think, right, for your undergrad?
Yeah, well, originally University of Ottawa, that was just, I'd say, a place of convenience. My father ended up, when he was still working as the chaplain general, which located him in Ottawa, the capital of the country.
I see.
And I ended up going to the University of Ottawa for sort of peculiar reasons. We were just talking about how great it is growing up in the military. One thing that turned out to be a bit of a challenge for me is they were they set up Canadian schools wherever you were, including if you were overseas. When in high school, I was over in what was then West Germany, but I was going to a Canadian school, but they were, I'd say, very loose and accommodating about enforcing basic rules of a curriculum. They gave you a lot of flexibility, and that kind of came back to haunt me when we moved to Ottawa and I had my last year of high school to do. I found myself in the situation where I had some in grade 12, and I think I had grade 7 math because I didn't like math, and they just let me not take it. I had grade 7 science because I didn't like science, and they just let me ignore it. I had grade 13 English and history. I sort of took all these things I liked and did well and just skipped the ones I didn't. And when we got to the Ontario system and it was time for me to graduate, I learned that basically, Steve, I wasn't going to graduate. I didn't have the diversity of courses at a senior level needed to graduate. And I was very fortunate that the local university, University of Ottawa, had a special program where if you didn't have a high school diploma, but you had done well in enough advanced level courses in any subject, they'd let you go in and do a BA. And that's how I got to the University of Ottawa. Did my undergraduate there. I did my law degree there. Went to Alberta for an MBA, and I had the pleasure of spending my summers for a couple of years while I was in law school, going down to the University of Miami and did a graduate degree in law and economics.
I see. Okay. How did you pick Miami?
Well, it's one of those things where I'd say I've had a number of experiences in life where things just happen and you see an opportunity and it strikes you a certain way and you go for it. So I'm in the middle of winter in Ottawa. It's brutally cold.
Yeah, I was just about to say, was it because you were freezing your ass off for long enough and you're like, I got to get out of here?
That's the short version. I'm in the law school, and yes, dead of winter, it's freezing cold, and there's this poster up on the wall with a palm tree. It just had a palm tree, and underneath it said, spend your summers in the University of Miami. It was a great program. It was, you had to apply. They only took 7 people to get a scholarship from the Ford Foundation, and I managed to get a great experience and got me out of the cold.
You know, there's some marketing creative person out there listening to this podcast who created that poster thinking, I knew that poster was going to get us more students.
It worked like a charm.
That's great. Okay, cool. Fantastic education. And then from there, yeah, walk us through a little bit some of the early career and kind of how you ended up in C-level like you did.
Well, I certainly did not set out to be C-level. I set out at the beginning of my career actually going from doing a law degree and an MBA. I started a career as a lawyer with a law firm called Bennett Jones, which was at the time and still is the largest law firm in Western Canada, but it's one of the largest energy firms. So it's about 300 and some lawyers, Steve, and the practice is almost exclusive energy law. And I went into that. I enjoyed it right from the moment I started. I began in 1985. I continued doing that until 2003. So I had a good long career. My specialty was the development and financing of large-scale natural gas-related projects, especially power projects. So that was my specialty. Did that based in Calgary, but the vast majority of the work that I did was for projects outside of the United States, in Australia, the UK. I enjoyed that career immensely. I think the only thing, and this kind of leads to my second career as an entrepreneur, I think the only thing that I found not satisfying about the law was, while it was a rewarding career financially, and it was certainly interesting, what was missing for me is I was sort of detached from what I was doing. I was not the one taking the risk. I was not the one building this. I was not really the one at the end of the day at risk for it. It wasn't my project. I was an advisor. Mm-hmm. And that was, to me, the one thing missing. And I got to know these entrepreneurs, these builders of companies, these creators of jobs. And I just thought, someday I would like to do that. And the someday for me came early 2000s, a couple of years before 2003. I think it was 2000 when I was asked to do some legal work, but it was in San Jose. And I was working on several projects as an attorney in my law firm. And if you know that time, like 2000, 2001, 2002,
right. Yeah.
very interesting period in California in two respects. One was in the energy world, we were going through the California energy crisis. The electricity prices just went crazy. And that was, I think, Gray Davis was the head of the government in California, and the whole state was really getting roiled with electricity prices.
Okay.
That's one thing going on, which I certainly related to. The thing I didn't relate to, but I found fascinating, was I'm right in the middle of Silicon Valley. I've had no experience with high tech and that whole world, and then I'm right physically there, and it's while the bubble is bursting, which for me was just a fascinating time because I hadn't really seen the bubble accumulate, but I was right there as it was bursting. And you get to know, not only did I get to know all these tech people, these entrepreneurs, but I got to know them under very difficult circumstances, which in my experience, Steve, that's really, not that you want to go through difficult experiences, but that is how you get to know people
right.
best.
Yep, I agree.
You don't really get to know people when everything's just great. You get to know someone when things kind of just go all to hell. And I'd say in a nutshell, my 3 years, whatever it was, 2 to 3 years while I was there in Silicon Valley as a lawyer, I was watching things go all to hell in the tech world, and I was seeing how people responded to it. And I came out of that with some tremendous new relationships, some tremendous new friendships that led me to decide, that's it for me. I am leaving Canada. I'm leaving the practice of law. I'm going to move with my wife to Santa Barbara, and I'm going to be an entrepreneur.
Wow.
And
how'd that conversation go at home? I'm just curious. You say, hey, I'm leaving.
Well, maybe better than you might imagine, because my wife comes from Houston, and she moved to Calgary to marry me and put up with the crazy cold weather of Calgary for many years. And she always dreamed of someday living in California.
Okay.
And that dream came true for this. So she was, as she has been my whole life, she has been my partner, and she's been instrumental in everything I've achieved. But she was 100% behind taking the leap and doing this.
Yes, yeah, especially after visiting California for a little bit. She's like, yeah, I'm in. I'm ready to move to the sunshine. That's great.
Absolutely.
And that was a risky move for you, though, right? I mean, a successful attorney, making great money, big law firm, energy law firm. But it sounds like that entrepreneurial bug, it was in there, and it just kept growing and kept growing. And then as you were around those people and you saw the action, it just continued to attract you. And so you made the move. Did you step right into an investment or right into a startup, or you just moved first and then kind of looked for what you wanted?
Well, my first opportunity was while I was in San Jose, I was asked if I would be willing to leave my law firm and become the CEO of a data center developer.
Okay.
And it was, I'd say, not naturally appealing in any respect other than one. This was a company that was had been well funded.
Okay.
It had a really good group of people, but it did not have a really good CEO, and it was failing badly. And I knew some of the shareholders, and they were the ones that asked me if I would be willing to do this, which coincided, Steve, with me, as I shared with you, mulling the idea of taking the leap and leaving the practice of law. Okay. And here I was being invited into this, I'd say, very unstable situation, very challenging situation, but one especially alluring, or maybe it was the alluring part of it was on the board of directors of this company was General Norman Schwarzkopf. And I thought this would be an amazing, coming from a military background.
Right.
And just,
perfect.
from what I knew of him, I thought if I'm going to become a business person, I would love to have this guy as my first mentor in the business world.
Wow.
And I met with him before I took the job because I wanted to know that would be the case, that I wouldn't, take this job and then he leaves, that
Right.
we would be doing this together. And I did it. It was, as you might imagine, an amazing experience getting to work with him and some of the other people that were on that board of directors. And we successfully, it was basically 1 year, turned this around and were able to successfully sell the company. Everybody made money. And that was my first foray. And it led to, as you might imagine, at least in my experience, sort of one thing that I do naturally leads to another without me really, I'd say, mapping it out. When we sold the company, and the opportunity came up rather suddenly, and we jumped on it, coming off of that, I looked at the idea of setting up my own business this time, which was going to be in the satellite imagery business. And I asked General Norman Schwarzkopf and some other retired generals that were with him if they would join me in it, and they did. And then I proceeded to enjoy 5 years of working with them on that satellite imagery business.
Wow. That's
another great experience.
That's a great story. I mean, you walked into a company that was funded but burning cash, and managed to stop the bleed on cash, and then turn it into cash flow positive and sell it for a profit, and everybody gets their money back and makes money. Wow. Yeah. From there, you have friends and people in your network that want to support you and be part of your next adventure. That's great.
That was exactly it. And it was definitely an example of, learning, getting to know people under stress. It was stressful and difficult from the get-go. I knew that going in. This wasn't a case of, I was taking on something that looked great, and then as I got to know it, it turned out to be very challenging. I knew perfectly well it was going to be challenging from the get-go. It was, but yeah, that was a benefit of that, is that I got, you bond with people tremendously, and I had the benefit of some great help in the form of General Norman Schwarzkopf and others, people that, one thing I learned immediately is my idea of stress compared to a guy who's a combat veteran. it puts things instantaneously into perspective.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Did you, when you wanted to be an entrepreneur and be in startups in this, maybe this tech world, at least at first, was it the attraction of being an investor, or did you go in with the goal of being the CEO, or did you just kind of get thrown into, being the CEO because of your natural leadership skills and your business savvy? I mean, I guess the question is, were you planning on being a CEO right away, or did that just happen? I'm just curious.
It really just happened, and it happened with that data center developer. I was at that time a partner in a law firm, very happy doing what I was doing. Yeah. I was definitely thinking hard about the idea of taking the leap and being an entrepreneur. I wasn't sure at all yet, Steve, what exactly that meant. Was I going to be an investor? Was I going to be, certainly wasn't going to be an inventor, but I wasn't sure what exactly that meant. It was just very appealing to go into the business world. And then this opportunity was presented to be the CEO of this company. And yeah, I'd say coming out of the back end of that, having gone through the challenge, having been able to rise to it, having a successful exit, and then seeing that, well, this can lead to the next thing. Yes, I liked and I like the role of CEO. I like the responsibility. And I think I do like the freedom that comes with it. There's some more autonomy that a CEO might have than others. I like that combination. And I think I like the idea that one of the things that I've seen is, especially in smaller companies, but I think it's true to some degree, no matter how big the company, is that like everybody, if you are the CEO, everybody takes their cue from you.
Right.
And I think I've come to realize I actually like that. I think it's a good discipline that you realize that like everything you do has a consequence on other people, because it literally does. When you're in that CEO role, you know, how you react to things, what you say, your manner, it all has an impact on others. And I think that, at least for me, I like that. I like the fact that it makes you think about, how should I respond to this? How should I say this? Because it's not just going to have an impact on the person I'm talking to or on myself. It really will have an impact on the whole venture. And yeah, that's a responsibility, but I like it.
You're so right. I had this conversation recently with somebody. In fact, it reminds me I need to do a podcast on this particular topic. Yeah, every single thing you do as a CEO is being watched and monitored by the people. I mean, all the way down to how long are you gone for lunch? What time did you come in? Who you took to lunch and who you haven't took to lunch? I mean, every little thing is being monitored. You're right, and they're watching your mannerisms, the way you behave in meetings. It all trickles down to the rest of the team. You're so right. You've been successful now as a CEO several times over. And can you just maybe give the listeners, what do you think those keys are to your success so far? Maybe a few things that you would relate back to the reasons for your success. Is it work ethic? Is it, the people skills? Talk a little bit about that. Why has Mike been successful several times over now as a CEO?
Well, a few things would come to mind. I think one is from the beginning for me, and it was part of when I was thinking about, why do I want to leave the practice of law, when I was considering should I do that, why I wanted to do that. Part of it for me, Steve, was I really wanted to venture out, and I wanted to do good. Now, I certainly wanted to do well financially, but I wanted to do good. And it was something that in the practice of law, as a consultant, you do what you do. You do what the client is working on, as opposed to getting to decide, what do you yourself want to do? What do you want to do good out there in the world? So for me, I'd say part of what I would attribute my success to would be, I think it has been a tremendous guiding principle that I only want to be involved in. I only want to lead a venture that's doing good out in the world.
Gotcha.
And it's not I do charitable work, but in business I wanted to make money too. Right. So it's that doing good while doing well, or doing well while doing good, however you want to put it. That's one principle. I
like that.
I think another thing would be, it has served me well, and I can directly attribute success to the fact that I have developed great relationships, and I have been very open to where those relationships can take me and the opportunities that they can create, as opposed to, I think when I was young, very young, I was very goal-oriented and very kind of, I'd say, wed to goals that I thought were the right goals. Mm-hmm. I think that, and this sort of harkens back to when I was telling about my mother and her being a career diplomat and being so interested in everybody she met and every experience she had and being very open to the whole world. I think that philosophy has been a big part of my success, is that I can directly attribute the success that I've had in my legal career with that data center developer, with ICE Energy, with the satellite imagery company, and what I believe is going to be this tremendous success with Bakken Midstream. Not so much to, some clear set of goals where I kind of mapped that out and said, this is what I'm going to do, but much more that I developed tremendous relationships, and I was always open to the opportunities that arise from those great relationships.
That is excellent advice, Mike. I really appreciate you bringing that up. And that is key for the listeners to really grab onto. Just open your mind. Let those relationships and those opportunities open new doors for you. You just never know what path they're going to take you down. You're so right, Mike. That's really good. I'm always telling, I have a 28-year-old and a 24-year-old sons, and I'm always preaching the networking and the relationships and just how critical it is. You can have a super high IQ and you can have great work ethic, but if you don't have relationships and people skills, you're not going anywhere. And I'm always preaching.
I fully agree.
I'm always preaching that, but so I'm always preaching the networking and the relationships. But the piece you just added in for the podcast that I think is critical is let your mind be open to the new opportunities those relationships can give you. I think that's fantastic advice. What would you give first-time CEOs? What kind of advice would you give them? Are there 2 or 3 things? We give a lot of career advice on this podcast. So let's just say there's some new CEOs or maybe even first-time executives. Let's say first-time executives at any level. Well, what advice would you give them? 2 or 3 key things.
Well, I think the advice for, if I just start with the first-time CEO, the advice would probably be something that we already touched on, Steve, which is this idea that you got to understand as CEO that like everybody is taking their cue from you, and that's just different. I think that is different as CEO than any other role in a venture, and I do not think that is well understood by a lot of people.
Agreed.
If I think of the most basic example of that, and these aren't CEOs, but when you're watching, I don't know if you're a football fan, but yeah, I'm a bit of a football fan,
absolutely.
Especially college football. And when I see the quarterback who I'll call the CEO, when I see a quarterback who, the team is down and they're on the bench with their head in their hands, and I think, what are you doing? Like, you just know that team is just deflating, just giving up when their leader is projecting that kind of defeatism. And, whether it works or not, when I see the quarterback on the team that's losing and he's going up and down the bench and he's getting people fired up, at the minimum, people are going to know they gave it their all. And if they lose, they're going to feel better about it. But they've got a shot at winning if they've got a leader that is keeping them in the game. So that's, I think, the advice best advice sort of special to a CEO.
Good,
I think the more general advice just about whatever C-level or executives is, I think to be successful from my own experience, I'd say it's a combination of, I do think you need to work hard. At least I have. Maybe there are people with such inherent brilliance that they really don't need to work that hard. I have had to work hard, and I think that has been just part of what I've achieved is through hard work. Obviously, it's been good fortune as well, although I do think a lot of good fortune is making sure that you take advantage of good fortune when it happens and don't miss that boat. The other part is, and I'd say this is equally important, is you better be genuinely enjoying what you're doing. And I don't mean like making the best of it when you really don't like it. I mean, you better be doing what you really love.
Right.
And that's why my whole career through different ventures, when I wake up, I've got a little personal routine for just my personal mental health, but I've got a bit of a business routine, which is it's there because I love doing what I'm doing, and if I don't love doing what I'm doing, I'm going to do something else.
Sorry, Mike. I'm sorry. I just interrupted.
Yeah.
Isn't it sad that there are people every day in America waking up and driving to jobs they hate? I really just feel people like that.
Yeah, I do, and I do see that myself. I read about it. It's very disappointing because I think that sometimes that person is there, because they feel they have to be there financially. Mm-hmm. But if they're in an environment that's a bad environment, I feel bad that there are CEOs out there that create those environments. And look, I have firsthand experience in having observed companies with poor leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And that poor leadership results in a miserable place to live,
mm-hmm.
miserable place to work. I've heard people say, well, in fact, I think I read this. There was some Harvard Business Journal article about, well, you know, what do you do if you're in this toxic environment with a bad leader? You can make like little pockets of happiness. And I think, no, you can't. That doesn't work like that in a company. If your CEO, the person who's leading the company, is a bad leader, you are not going to like change that from within with little pockets of happiness. That's a place that if the shareholders are not going to change that bad leader, you got to go somewhere else. You got to go where you're going to enjoy yourself. And, if you have the opportunity to be the CEO, great. Then be a great CEO and make sure you're doing what you love doing. If you're not a CEO, make sure you're working in a company where you love it and you love the leadership and you're part of it. And it's very disappointing to me, very frustrating when you see people that are kind of stuck, whether it's because they made a bad choice or they're in a company where it's just poor leadership. But most of the time, I think if there's unhappy people in a company, it's bad leadership.
Yep, you're absolutely right. By the way, on just one last point on this topic, you touched on it a second ago. I think a lot of people say to themselves, because most of America lives check to check, they say to themselves, well, I have to have this job because I have to have this certain amount of money to make this particular mortgage or to drive this particular car. And so I have to stay in this environment to keep up my monthly bills. And the reality is that's just not true. If people will take the leap of faith and make the change, they'll figure out a way to make the adjustments. They'll find a way to create a new budget. They'll figure out the finances. Maybe they have to drive a different car. Maybe they're driving a 1987 beat up Ford pickup versus a BMW. But guess what? At the end of the day, you'll be happier if you put yourself in a better environment. They'll figure it out. I just want to encourage the listeners to understand that you don't have to stay in a bad environment just because you think you have to have a certain amount of money on your pay stub. You'll figure it out if you'll just take the leap.
If I could just add to that, Steve, because I think that you're right. You want to be happy. You deserve to be happy. You should be happy. But I also think if you are not happy, you are going to do less well in your job. You are going to, therefore, make less money, have less career opportunities. Because I've never seen an example in my career of a person who is unhappy in their job but performs really well and moves up the ladder. So I think getting yourself out, if you're unhappy, get yourself out of that situation, find a place where you are happy. You're not only going to be happier, you're going to do better financially because you will perform better. If you're happy, you'll work better, you'll be rewarded. So there's two reasons, I think, to get out of a bad situation, both happiness and it flows right through to you'll perform better and be remunerated better.
Totally agree. Let me ask you a quick question around startups because you've been involved with smaller companies and startups, which is super risky, by the way. Not everybody has the stomach for it. Any quick advice or maybe one or two quick things around that topic for somebody thinking of leaving the cushy Fortune 500 job and joining a startup? Any quick advice there on how to make that transition or deal with that?
I think advice there would be if you're doing it, make sure you understand there's going to be no support. There's going to be no safety net. So don't look down. It's very, very different than a big company for those reasons. And the other thing, which I hope would be obvious to someone, but I've seen that it's not always obvious when someone from a big company goes into the startup world is you might have a really cool title, including you might be the CEO of that company, but you also might be like the chief janitor and chief dishwasher. You have to have that mindset in a startup, generally speaking. Now, there may be some very special startups that are extraordinarily well funded, but most in the real world, I'd say, require you, no matter what's your title, to be multidisciplined and to have a willingness, Steve, to roll up your sleeves and do stuff that you might think in a big company is beneath you. You book your own travel, you make your own arrangements, you type your own stuff. That's the world of a startup, and I think I like it, but it's very different than big companies. And I have worked both directly and indirectly in big company environments, and it's different. I just say, generally speaking, there's a lot of support around you in a big company. You don't have that in a startup.
Agreed. I was interviewing another entrepreneur recently, and he same thing. He just said, you may not like accounting, but guess what? You're going to be involved in accounting. Or you may not like anything revolving systems or IT, but guess what? You're going to be involved at first. You have to wear all the hats, or you got to be somewhat involved in every functionality of the business, at least in a startup. And if you're not comfortable, stepping outside your functional expertise, you're going to struggle. So kind of the same thing you're saying. So let me ask you, let's talk about Bakken. Give us an overview of Bakken Midstream, who they are, what they do, and why you're excited about that. Just tell the listeners a little about it.
Well, I'd say it's a great example, Steve, of how a relationship, if you're open to new things, can lead to something completely wonderful and unexpected. Back when I was CEO of Ice Energy, this is going back now, I think about 5 years ago, I was speaking at a Macquarie Bank conference in Vail on energy storage, and a fellow by the name of Steve Lebo, who was a retired investment banker, quite famous one with the firm DLJ, Donaldson, Lufkin, Jenrette. He was famous because he was the original financier of, it was Costco first and then Starbucks. So he had tremendous success as an investment banker.
See.
And he was at this conference because he was invested in a very large pumped hydro storage development down in Southern California, and he heard me speak. He came up and introduced himself and was talking to me about, he wanted to learn about Ice Energy. Mostly I'd say out of curiosity, not really as an investor, just out of curiosity. But we became friends. He lives just south of me down in Westlake, so we live fairly close by. He mostly comes from the retail world, so I mostly just found him a fascinating person, and I think he found me interesting as well in my own way.
Okay.
We stayed in touch about what each other was doing, but I guess not as in touch as I thought, because when I made the decision, which I made late last year, I decided that I'd taken Ice Energy to a point at which I thought it was just a good time to have a change in leadership, to get more of a operating leader as opposed to me, more of a entrepreneur, deal-making leader.
Yep.
I reached out to a few people, friends of mine, him being one, to just say this is what I was thinking of doing, and was making me think about what do I want to do next. And he said, literally, I think I dropped him an email, and within a minute or two, I got an email back saying, can I come and have lunch with you today? I need to see you right today. And we had lunch, and he starts talking about North Dakota. And I said, Steve, what in the world are you doing in North Dakota? You're this big retail guy. Like, he knows everybody in the retail world. And he's talking about natural gas in North Dakota. So the short version of this, Steve, is that he's talking to me for like 3 minutes, and I say, you are describing something I've already seen before. So he's talking about, in North Dakota, they've gone from kind of nothing in the oil and gas world to the second largest producer of oil in the country.
Right.
The oil is special in that it has associated natural gas. So if you are producing oil, whether you like it or not, you are also producing natural gas.
Okay.
And while they were plenty ready for the oil, they've enjoyed that as a tremendous boom in their economy in North Dakota. They were not ready for the natural gas, which is a lot more complicated to deal with than oil. Oil is basically like cash coming out of the ground. As soon as you get it, you put it in a truck, or you put it in, can't go in pipelines, but you can rail it. You can turn it into cash right away. It's easy to transport. Natural gas, much more complicated to deal with. It takes a lot more infrastructure, a lot more planning. There's a lot you can do with it. With natural gas, you can heat homes, you can make electricity, you can take liquids that are in the natural gas and make different products, petrochemical products. So there's a lot of things you can do with it, but the problem they're having in North Dakota is they were, I'd say, basically caught off guard by the growth of the oil production, and with it, the gas production, and just didn't have the infrastructure. And the consequence is they flare the gas. They light the gas that comes out and flare it. And it's extraordinary levels of flaring.
Can I just ask real quick for layman's question here? So every time you see one of those things flaring like that, that's natural gas that could be captured and capitalized on, but there's not enough infrastructure to deal with it.
Correct. And Now, to just put a little nuance on that, in most parts of the world where there is oil production that has with it natural gas, you have, even when you've got lots of infrastructure, you will commonly have some amount of flaring temporarily when wells first come on. And that flare will look like, I'll call it like kind of a lazy flare that you see flickering up at the top of the production facility. And it's I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's relatively minor.
I see.
That is not what's happening in North Dakota. What's happening in North Dakota, instead of, I'll call it that lazy flare, you see like a tower of fire shooting up in the air. It is a very bad situation. The state of North Dakota is painfully aware that this is a bad situation.
I see.
It's bad in a couple respects. It's obviously bad from an environmental perspective of all the things that you can do with fossil fuels, natural gas specifically, which, by the way, in the world of fossil fuels, natural gas should be a relatively clean form of energy. However, if what you're doing is simply lighting it on fire and burning it into the air, that is really bad environmentally. That is kind of the worst thing you could do with it, environmentally speaking. The other aspect to it, which is, I'd say, depending upon how you value the environment, it's either more important or less important, but it's important, is it's a tremendous waste of a resource. If you are lighting it on fire, something that could be, you could have productive use of it, then you really are, you're wasting this resource. And to put it in perspective, I think, there's enough natural gas being flared. It's 550 million cubic feet a day that's being flared. And to put that in more concrete terms, you could generate enough electricity to power every home in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Washington, D.C., just with the natural gas that's being lit on fire.
Wow.
So if I turn to Bakken Midstream, our mission, and we have put together the right team for this, together with the right investors, we are coming into the state of North Dakota, working hand in hand with the state itself, and we are working on developing and owning the natural gas infrastructure needed to harness that gas and not just use it productively, but really do that in the state of North Dakota. We want to create a whole new industry in the state of North Dakota for the benefit of North Dakota that's using that gas. And it's starting with what's being wasted. But as they continue to produce, we want to make sure that all of that resource, that natural gas resource, is that we're good stewards of it, because it's a tremendous resource. Whether you want to look at the different products that you can make from natural gas, or you just want to use the natural gas for heating, for power production, you can use it to make fertilizers. There's all kinds of things that you can do. And if I go back to my clean tech work with Ice Energy, natural gas has a very valuable role to play in terms of enabling renewables. as we continue to work on building up storage that can be deployed in large scale and economically, until we have all the storage that we need on the grid, you've got to have something else to balance the intermittency of renewables. Mm-hmm. And the best resource for that is natural gas. That's the cleanest that we have today. So in the case of North Dakota, they've got, right now they're burning coal to make electricity. They're wasting the natural gas, and they do have some wind. It's actually a great place for wind power, but you can't really use the wind when all you've got to back it up when it's not blowing is coal, because coal plants don't go up and down, but gas would. So that's our little venture, Bakken Midstream, which we hope to build into a really big venture.
Wow. It really ties to what you said earlier. I want to do well, but I want to do good, right? When you say I want to do well, meaning like, hey, I want to make money like everybody else, but I want to do good things for people or the environment. I want to, make the world a better place while I'm doing well. Well, this ties right into exactly what Bakken Midstream is doing. It's perfect.
It does. When I went up there myself and saw the flaring, and with my background in the natural gas industry, knowing what you could do with that gas, I felt this is a case where we can do tremendous good. We can stop, what I consider a tremendous bad and start doing a tremendous good. And
that's great.
I've been really encouraged, Steve, by the reception we've got in North Dakota. It's not a case of these people saying, "Oh, this is great that we're burning all this natural gas." They want to get this fixed, and right. I think we've got just the right team to do it. And it is definitely a venture like my other ventures, where I wake up in the morning and I am excited to move this forward.
That's awesome. Speaking of teams, so as this thing grows, you're going to be interviewing and hiring people. Can I ask you, real quick for the listeners, you've hired, hundreds and hundreds of people and interviewed probably thousands.
Yep.
When you're interviewing somebody, can you talk a little bit about, what are you looking for? What are the key things Mike's looking for when, besides of course that, their skill set matching the job requirements, what are you looking for in people when you talk to them?
For me, and I think this is just my style of management, I'm looking for people that want responsibility and want autonomy. I am not a fan of management in the sense of I do not want a team of people that need to be managed. I really want, and that applies whether you're talking about someone like right out of school or whether you're talking about someone very, very senior. I have always liked people that are self-motivated. They want to take on responsibility within their capability, and they're willing to be accountable for it, but they basically want to be autonomous. They want freedom. They want to be able to, take this on and run with it. Now, with that, I don't want like lone wolves. I want people that can work with others and collaborate. But my best experiences in business has been building up teams of people that are, to some degree, a team of CEOs, whether they're senior or junior. They have their own area. They take full responsibility for it. And so that's what I want to see in someone when I'm interviewing. I find it easiest myself when it comes to interviewing to really just be asking people to tell their story. And I listen carefully to not just what that story is, but how they tell it and what they emphasize or what they seem to de-emphasize. And I find that that's just the easiest way, Steve, to get into a conversation, to get to know them and figure out, do they really have those attributes? You're obviously right that there are basic requirements, basic qualifications for any job that the person has to have. To me, that's much more of a they either do or they don't. It's a factual matter.
Right. The
interview part is much more, I think, getting to know them and getting to see, do they have the qualities you're looking for? And that's the quality bottom line I'm looking for, is that that person is going to be an a strong, self-motivated, accountable, responsible person, part member of the team. That's, I think, the kind of person that's going to drive the best results for the business.
That's great stuff, Mike. And by the way, just to emphasize a point there for the listeners, if you're listening to this podcast and you interview people on a regular basis, what Mike just said right there about getting into a conversation with the person to get to know them is so much more important than just looking at a piece of paper with a standard list of questions that you're trying to get through, right? I mean, I see people make that mistake all the time, and the interviewer is not really listening. They're not really engaging in the conversation to get to know the person and dissect their personality. So I think that's key. Mike, gosh, I could talk to you for another 2 hours, by the way. We probably should schedule more time, but can I just ask you two more quick questions?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, just such a great career so far. I mean, really, you've just done some outstanding things. Congratulations on everything you've done. When you do look back now and you're having one of those reflective moments, you're sitting on the deck in Santa Barbara with a glass of wine and you're reflecting back, is there, if you were able to go back and talk to your 21-year-old self today, is there anything you'd tell that young man? What advice would you give him?
My advice would probably be something I think we touched on earlier in our conversation, Steve, which is I would tell myself, if I had the ability to do that, back that younger man, enjoy this journey you're on. I think back then, as I mentioned to you, I was, I think, overly goal-oriented as a young man. I had very fixed goals, very clear goals that I thought were important, and I thought of them as very motivating to me. And over time, I saw that, I guess I started to see that these goals were not so important in and of themselves, that it was much more important that you're enjoying what you're doing, you're enjoying the journey, which got me to kind of rethink the idea of goals. I found that the real test to me of whether a goal is a good goal or a bad goal is whether I am going to enjoy the journey towards trying to achieve that goal. If I'm setting a goal and I'm thinking, this is going to be a grueling, awful journey, but it's all going to be worth it because of this, when I achieve this goal, I'll just feel awesome. That has never happened for me. I'll tell you, as a young man, I had made that mistake, and I've seen the consequence of making yourself unhappy and believing that achieving the goal will make you happy, even though that journey was, you knew going in you were not going to enjoy it. Is not something that I should have done. I would benefit, I think, from this wisdom of later years of seeing that that's the test for me. Enjoy the journey, and that's how you know whether a goal is a good goal or a bad goal. If I set a goal and I'm excited about it and I can't wait to go after it and I'm just going to love working on it, which is why, that's how I want to wake up in the morning. Right. I want to wake up in the morning excited about working on my goal because I like the work on that journey. Then I know I'm on the right track. And whether I achieve that goal or not, because I'm probably one of those people that is susceptible to setting goals, Steve, that might be overly ambitious. I don't always achieve my goals, right. But I've never regretted not achieving a goal because when I think of goals I've set that I've not achieved, I think I'm still better off having set that lofty goal, having enjoyed going after it, and probably achieved a lot more than had I set a lesser goal and achieved it and looked back on it and thought, probably to me that would be the most disappointing thing would be to underset a goal, set a goal that was too easy, not hard enough, not ambitious enough.
Really good stuff, Mike. Awesome stuff. What's Mike's core purpose now? That every day when Mike wakes up, because your core purpose changes, right? I think, at least for me, it has as I've gotten older. I'm 52 years old. It's a hell of a lot different than it was when I was 21. In fact, I think my core purpose.
I'm pretty sure. I'm guessing you didn't even think about core purpose when you're in your 20s.
I had a core purpose. It was drink beer and chase girls. That's what my core purpose was. But
probably a good one for them.
At this stage, though, now in your life, when you think about that, how would you define that core purpose today for you?
I think of that in two different respects. So when I think about what you've called core purpose, I think of that from a personal perspective, and then I think of that from a business perspective.
Okay.
And I do think that way. I'd say every morning when I get up. For me, the personal core purpose is I want to be enjoying every moment. I want to enjoy every moment, literally from when I wake up. And I think for me, it's important, given my work, and I think just given my personality, that I have that little, I don't really meditate, but I call it a bit of a ritual that I really do need to remind myself daily, right when I start, just from a personal perspective, to enjoy every moment of the day. Because if I don't, I am apt to jump into I'm working on this and I'm doing this, and it's easy to miss out on just the amazing moments in everyday life that if you're paying attention and you're really being focused on what's happening right in front of you and right around you, these are things that you just don't want to miss out on, because, who knows where I'm going to be tomorrow, or even if I'm going to be here tomorrow. So on the personal side, I'd say my core purpose is I want to be disciplined and just start each day with reminding myself that that's what I want to do. I want to be enjoying every moment, whatever that happens to be. On the professional side, it's also a bit of a morning ritual, is I want to be thinking about how that day I'm going to advance our business. And I guess this goes back to, who do I want to be working with, and what kind of team do I want to have? I want to have a team of people that all think that same way too, that they so enjoy what they're doing that when they're thinking about business, they're thinking about how do they themselves advance the business that we're in together.
Oh, good.
And I'm excited every morning to do that. And in my career, if I've ever gotten to the point where I'm not actually excited. And, for me, that happened at a certain stage with Ice Energy, where I realized I'm not as energized. I'm not excited about advancing the business as I had been. And when I started asking myself, well, why is that the case? I realized I was really feeling like I had kind of done what I was meant to do at Ice Energy, and it was time for a change. And we needed to have someone who would wake up excited about how they were going to advance the business.
Really great stuff, Mike. It's so important for the listeners to understand that, especially for the younger professionals. Life is short. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, change it. Do something different. It's so critical. You'll be so much happier. You'll enjoy life so much more. Mike, you've been awesome. Thank you, sir, for being on the podcast. Congratulations on everything you've done in your personal career, and congrats on Bakken Midstream. I wish you guys the best as things continue. And let's talk again soon. I'd love to fly out and hang out in the Santa Barbara area for a little while. So let's connect soon.
Consider yourself invited. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thanks, Mike. Take care. Have a good day. We truly hope you find our material helpful and entertaining. And while our podcast can be heard across most platforms, including iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud, you can become a supporter of this podcast by visiting our show on the platform Anchor FM. That's anchor.fm/Riderflex. You can also send us your questions or suggested topics for future episodes to the email address podcast@riderflex.com. Or drop us a voicemail at 888-964-5876, extension 710. Visit riderflex.com to learn more about us. Thanks so much for listening, folks, and have a great day.